This is the Lit Podcast with me, Dr. Derek Siu, where we explore purpose, potential, and the human experience. And hopefully uncover some new ways of being and doing to optimize our experience in the process. Jump in and join me for a deep dive with my special guests each and every episode for some revelatory, stimulating, and sometimes scintillating conversations. All right, it's time to get lit. Let's do this. Hey, Derek here, and thanks for tuning into my fresh new podcast. So happy to have you. You know, it's been a year in the making, and that's why I'm super excited to finally launch this with this episode featuring my very own little sister talking about an increasingly important subject, sustainability. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I really hope you will too. We cover everything starting from the early beginnings when she first got started in the space, her experience working for big corporates including IBM and Apple, to fledgling NGOs for sustainable travel in Asia. And finally, landing back in Australia working for Edge Environment, consulting with companies, governments and SMEs on how to be end-to-end more sustainable. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Hey, welcome to this episode where we are talking to none other than my little sister here, who is heavily involved and very passionate about sustainability. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Derek. Glad to be here. Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm very happy that you have decided that you've agreed to have a chat with me about this very important topic.
Yes.
But before we get onto all that heavy stuff, I thought it would be best to just track back and learn a little bit more about you and the path that you've taken so far. When did you actually get interested in this whole space?
Well, sustainability itself, I've known about for probably 10 years. But if you go back even further, when I was at school, my year 11 economics teacher, Mr. Walsh, he taught about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And that was the first time I've actually heard about that topic in itself. And that was pretty much the start of my journey, because before that I knew about animal conservation, human rights, but I hadn't really heard much specifically about the environmental impacts and how that related to everything else. So sustainability incorporates all three areas, well, more than that, the economy as well. That's why he was the economics teacher teaching about this stuff, because it does impact us globally. So at that time, the word didn't really exist. The grandfather of sustainability came up with the term, I think, probably in the 2000s, because in the 1990s, he had coined the term the environmental P&L, profit and loss. So I learned about that at university in accounting, but they called it the triple bottom line at the time.
I see. Okay. Now, this is what's interesting to me is that how old were you when you were introduced to this environmental stuff? 16. Okay. So when I was 16, I don't think I had any idea about all this stuff, or I certainly didn't have any interest in it at that point. I mean, if I was involved with anything at that time, I was probably more involved with things like the Interact Club, where we'd be doing stuff to help people. But certainly environment stuff wasn't a really big thing back then. So what was it about this area that sparked your interest? What is it about this that really, made you interested and keen to learn out more?
Well, originally I think it was because I really liked animals. So I came from an animal conservation perspective. And then also from a human rights perspective, I've always been interested in the humanitarian side of things. And then suddenly there was this other thing I didn't really know that much about. So that was the interesting cross-section where it kind of, that kind of sparked my interest. So that was just the seed, if you like.
Sure.
Because it was interesting. I didn't really know how that affected the other parts that I was interested in, but later, now I know how everything is actually interconnected.
Now, what I remember from our childhood, because our parents, they don't like animals, or they didn't have a affinity towards animals.
Yeah.
So how did you get your love of animals? Because I remember at one point you did go out disobey our family rules, and you brought home a dog, and didn't last for very long in terms of within our household. But where did all this love of animals come from?
I don't know. I think as a child, our cousins had so many pets, and we had pretty much one budgie, which I absolutely loved my budgie. But, compared to the almost like farm-like experience of our cousins, I was like, wow, it's so nice to have all these animals. So it might have been influenced by our cousins. And, as you know, our youngest cousin became a vet because of her love of animals. I didn't have any aspirations to be a vet. I wanted to be a marine biologist quite early on because I was interested in the marine, the aquatic ecosystem. So, yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I guess as children, we don't always know what sparked. There wasn't any specific incident that I remember that sparked my interest in animals specifically.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, you went from a very strong interest in animal conservation. You're in high school. You got exposed to this environmental stuff. Then you actually went on to university and you studied accounting. So how did you kind of pivot or?
Well, humanities was always my strong point compared to like yourself, who was more scientific based, and our parents were much more on the sciences.
You saying I'm scientific?
Well, your first degree was very science based, right? And our parents, they both studied sciences. Our sister did as well. I was definitely not a science person. I was definitely a humanities person. So from our father's perspective, the only way to make money out of humanities was to become an accountant. That was the only, or that was the best form. Like I actually did want to be a lawyer, but my grades weren't high enough to get into law school straight away. I'd have to do 1 year of undergrad and then transition. So I just followed, as a good Asian, child, I follow what my dad tells me to do, which is study accounting, because you'll be able to, earn a good living afterwards, and you'll be set up for life if you're an accountant.
Hang on. So just so I can get this clear, the idea was that you'd work as an accountant in a humanitarian organization. Was that the idea, or how does that tie in?
No, it was just being an accountant. It didn't matter. Humanities is the group, the study, the department. It doesn't not necessarily be a humanitarian. I didn't know how it was going to pan out. I didn't make any sort of compromise going, okay, if I do what daddy says, then I can match, like, this is my passion area, and I can still obey daddy's orders and do the two things together. That wasn't what I was thinking at the time.
Sorry. Accounting is under humanities?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's news to me.
Well, just in terms of, it's a softer science. It's not the science. So humanities is languages, arts, commerce, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't realize that was all classed under that.
Well,
okay.
I think so. Maybe that was the old classification. It might have been modified now.
Sure.
Basically, not a science person.
Okay. So you did accounting. So you did accounting, numbers.
Yeah.
Something that I have a great adversity towards, but it has to be done. But I have to say, after having experience doing accounting and learning the hard way, making a ton of mistakes, there is a very big satisfaction when you've got the numbers all together and everything matches up.
Yeah.
But a very painful process that I wish I didn't have to go through.
Well, yeah, me too. That was the first 10 years of my career, is doing that, making other people's numbers balance or figure out why they don't balance. It's quite painful, but yes, satisfying when you kind of finally get there. But it's also like, why did I have to do this in the first place? And is there any way I can get out of doing this again in the future by putting in place measures and other ways to do it, so you don't actually have to touch that stuff again? So what
actually happened? You finished accounting, you went into the workforce, you worked as an accountant.
Yes. So ironically, I did 2 degrees. So I did accounting. Accounting was one major, and my other major was in marketing. So I did a dual degree, commerce and business. So I couldn't get a job in marketing. And at the time, I realized the way they were teaching marketing at the time was basically you're trying to create a need and sell that to everybody else. And I thought that was highly unethical. And I couldn't grapple with that as a university student going, I do not want to go into this industry because it's awful from that perspective. The irony is the fact that I'm working in marketing now. but from a sustainability perspective. So there's a good way, there is a need for it to market the good messages. But at the time, that didn't really exist. It was very niche, and it was definitely not taught at university. So I couldn't get a job in management or business management or marketing as I graduated. So the only job I could get was in accounting, because everyone needs accountants. So that was the easiest thing. And that, I hated that my dad was right in that, do accounting, and then you'll be able to get a job. I'm like, no, I don't. I'll just do the degree because it'll make you happy, but that's not what I really want to do. And then in the end, that's the only job I could get. So he's like, yeah, thanks, Dad. You're right.
Kind of. I mean, because that was what you trained in. I think if you had gotten a degree in something else, you'd have been probably likely have gotten a job in that particular other area.
So that's how I ended up doing accounting. And then once you're in the machine, as it were, the accounting machine, the next thing to do is to do chartered accounting, because I went straight into a mid-size accounting firm. So work with lots of different clients, get lots of exposure to lots of different industries. So that was really good, doing all the things that you painfully have experienced yourself. And then during that time, you also do postgraduate study, which is extremely stressful while you're doing this job when you first graduate as well. So, but it has been I don't regret doing it. And I'm still a member of the Chartered Accountants, and now I'm working with them also from a sustainability point of view as well to push the agenda that way. So everything's kind of come 360. Everything that I thought I didn't want to do as a university student, accounting, marketing, I'm kind of doing both, like working both those spaces 20 years later, which is bizarre because I would never have envisaged that if you asked me that either as a first year uni student or as a university graduate. I would never imagine that's where I am right now.
Okay, so let's just rewind a little bit. So you worked as an accountant,
yes.
And then when did you get? I know that you went to Ireland. You worked there. Was that with IBM?
That was with IBM, yeah.
As an accountant.
As an accountant, yeah.
Okay, so was that your last accountancy job, or what was the next? No. What was the step towards doing more of this sustainability work?
So in between, I actually went to Latin America for 9 months, and that's where I got exposed to poverty and that sort of thing. I started being more interested in the humanitarian side again, going, what's going on in these countries? Can we fix this? And when I arrived in Ireland, I really wanted to do a career switch, and this was like 15 years ago, and I couldn't, and that's why I ended up working in accounting again, because after traveling for 9 months, I was broke. So I, not being able to get any other job, I ended up going back into a well-paying, thanks Dad, accounting job, which it wasn't terrible because, you got a good name on your CV and the rest of it. And then I moved to London, and again, I tried to do a bit of a switch and see whether I could get a job doing something else. But when you're early stage career, whatever you have in your CV is kind of what you get.
You kind of get pigeonholed.
You get pigeonholed into, like, if you're an accountant, here's an accounting job. Why would you want to do anything else? So I had a couple of good, I had a contracting job, and then I had a full-time job when I was in London, and I was working for an online travel agency. And at the same time, I started doing a course at a London university about sustainable development. And that's where I learnt about sustainability in the earlier concepts. And also I did a paper on sustainable travel, and I thought, that could actually work. Sustainable travel, it's economic empowerment, it's cultural sensitivity to the local people, it's also environmentally respectful. So it's about incorporating all those practices so that when you travel, you actually put money back into the local people's pockets. You also respect their culture and the environment. So I thought that could actually work as a business model, where I could actually still survive and, earn a good wage and do the thing I believe in. So I left my well-paying job-ish, but full-time. That was the last proper accounting job that I did, was in London. Packed up my bags and went to Thailand, and hoped that the company, the NGO that I was working for, would, give me the experience that I would need to be able to then, project my career into sustainable travel. That was the dream at the time, 10 years ago.
So just talking about this sustainable travel, I think for a lot of people that's a very ambiguous term. Like for me, if someone said sustainable travel, what I'd be thinking is that it's a travel agent that's going to organize a trip that is going to help. The activities will be organized around supporting the local the infrastructure or the basically local mom and pop shops, whatever. Is that correct or what?
No, that's a good example of doing that. So that's one part of it. So one part is supporting local businesses, supporting the local community by spending local, staying local, all those sort of things. So you don't stay at if you're in Thailand, don't go stay at the Hilton. Go stay at the local hotel, or, Airbnb's kind of taken off with that sort of thing where you put money back into the locals, although sometimes that's a bit more contentious.
Airbnb wasn't around back then, right? This was way before then.
It was just coming out in 2011. It was just becoming popular then, but this is 2010. So it did, I think it was starting. It was already but it wasn't the sensation it is today, or not as prevalent as it is today.
So what kinds of things were you doing at that time in terms of promoting sustainable travel in Thailand?
So I was working for a small tourism operator who would bring mostly people from the UK or Europe to Thailand and put them into like volunteerism situations where they could be volunteering at an orphanage, or they could be teaching English in like a local Burmese school, or they could be doing a village homestay that was very popular as an ecotourism mechanism back. Well, it's still slightly popular now, but they were the things that they organized, and they were promoting that most of the locals that they worked with in providing these tourists to them didn't depend on them for the tourism dollars, but it was more authentic, and it was a respectful way. One of the projects that I saw was actually working with the mangroves. So there's a science project where you could go out and help with this specific science project on documenting the mangrove population, which is really important. So there was an environmental side. It wasn't just, the orphanages and the teaching English thing, which is very common. So that's where I started learning about it. But I also realized that the organization I was working for, I didn't gel with them, with their philosophy in terms of sustainable tourism. I didn't think what they were doing was 100% sustainable, not even from their own perspective, how they will survive going to the future, as well as what they were doing for the local communities. So that's why, from a philosophical point of view or ideological point of view, I didn't stay that long in that organization, and then went on to work with a responsible tour operator in Laos who was basically only promoting hotels that were owned by Lao people. So, and also travel services. And that was like an amazing month of volunteering from my point of view, but they paid for all my hotels. They paid for me to go do things like hot air ballooning, rock climbing, going down Vang Vieng in the river, like tubing and that sort of stuff. So they paid me to do these things because they wanted to promote the local tour operators. So I had to review them. So it was,
sounds like a fun job. I'm jealous.
It was amazing experience, but also extremely exhausting. So I got an insight into what it is to be a travel blogger, which you have to document everything. So you almost can't quite enjoy it because you have to be taking notes and taking photos of everything, and then having to post every day, reviewing everything that you've done. That's quite, like, it sounds exotic and glamorous, but at the end of the day, it was a great experience, but there was no way I could do that sustainably for myself long term. 1 month, I was exhausted. I was, working till midnight just trying to put together the material, the content, and just documenting everything and then submitting it so that it could get uploaded onto the, the interwebs. It was incredible, but yes, not as fun as you might think it is.
So you quit after a month?
Well, yeah. I mean, originally the guy wanted me to do 3 months, and he was a foreigner as well. So a lot of these times, it's foreigners coming into these developing countries going, I want to help these people, and they set something up, which is amazing, but it's also, I think he actually did it the right way. He really respected the local culture. Not to say the other person didn't, but I think there's a lot of organizations out there that don't. They just kind of come in almost like the UN or the World Bank do and go, hey, we know what's best for you, and they don't really consult the locals. So that's where sustainable travel really, when you have that synchronicity between whoever's doing it and the actual local people and cultures. It could be from the same, like it could be Australians also being disrespectful to the people that, you know, live in regional New South Wales or regional Australia, that sort of thing, that aren't, you know, that are supposedly doing sustainable travel practices, but they're not respecting the local culture. So it's not necessarily foreign is what I'm saying. It could be locals also not respecting their own like countrymen.
So what happened after that? You've had this experience with Laos. You had this. Were you still looking for other potential opportunities of doing sustainable travel in Asia?
Sure. Well, I was looking for it anywhere really. Like Africa, there was definitely a lot of opportunities, but everything you kind of had to pay for it. And I'm like, no. I was like, I am a seasoned professional. I'm quite experienced. Why should I pay for these services? And what am I paying you for exactly? And I thought that was quite sort of a rip job, and that's not really what I think, you know. And I want to make money. I wanted to figure out how I can make money out of it. I could see how these people were making money out of it, but I didn't want to do it that way. So I was
by getting people to pay them.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's the administration fee or whatever, but I just didn't think it was. I didn't think that was particularly sustainable method either, and the programs didn't seem that sustainable. You know, because you wouldn't have. You know, if you do that, you don't get this. Especially I think we've spoken about education before. If you have different foreigner coming every 4 weeks to teach English to this one class, yes, okay, on one hand it's better than having nobody at all teaching them English, but at the same time they don't have that real learning that you can get when you have a consistent teacher there for a period of time and develop those relationships and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of reasons why I didn't. There was a lot of opportunities there that I didn't pursue, and I was thinking, well, how can I make a career out of this and actually earn enough for me to survive? Not that I need a lot, but you have to think about your own financial future. Thanks, Dad, again for that lesson, and accounting profession for, you know, teaching me all those things. So you know, I had that thought, which was good because it means that I can, you know, I have that lens in terms of what is it that I'm going to turn my hand to and make sure that I'm not, I'm able to have my own personal security into the future. Whereas a lot of people, they're very passionate in this space and they burn out, and they also don't take care of themselves financially. So that's I'm definitely not in that category. And I don't. That's great that people are so passionate, but that's also not so great when they burn out and then they've got nothing left. And then that particular NGO, whatever it is they've started, falls over because it was relying on that one person doing all these things. So that's very common especially in the NGO space, like globally as well as locally here in Australia.
Have you been involved with? I mean, that was 10 years ago. Have you been keeping your hand on the pulse in terms of what's happening in the NGO space now?
Yeah, definitely. And then just to cap off where I went with sustainable travel stuff, in the end, I couldn't find any way to do it. So I just do it for my own passion projects. I still advocate for it on all my little forums and my website and all my social media channels. But in terms of NGOs, the last full-time job I had before my current one was working for it was a not-for-profit in Sydney who were doing live crowdfunding events, raising money for other charities that were specifically focused on social impact issues in Australia, some overseas, but mostly Australia. And for me, because already by this stage a few years ago, I was so focused on sustainability being not just the humans, not just the environment, but everything, that when I was working for them for 18 months, I'm like, you're doing great things, but I'm seeing the same thing. You know, the same cycle happens where you've got one person who's super passionate about helping the homeless or helping relieve poverty or the refugees, which are admirable, great projects. But if they don't get the donations, or if they get sick, you know, or they decide they burn out because they're so passionate about it, the whole thing falls over. So definitely what I'm saying now is still relevant today. And I know that because I've seen that and been in that industry of social impact, of charities for about 18 months only. Like I finished up last June. So I'm still connected to that community because there are so many amazing people there. You know, I totally support and love what they do, but I just can't be part of that in my personal future.
Sure. So it sounds like there needs to be a lot more structure and planning to make that stuff work on a sustainable level.
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, the other part of sustainability is everything's interconnected. So yes, you can alleviate poverty or alleviate homelessness, but then you're elevating these people, taking them off the street, and then where are they going to? Then you look at the bigger issue about the infrastructure and access to services, and maybe the thing isn't just about them being off the streets. There's a mental health issue perhaps, or there's other issues that are related to it. And then you think about the world that we live in and how hard it is. It's a struggle for us from a day-to-day perspective as well. And they're just going from one fire into another. Not saying that you should leave them on the streets either, but you just can't. I feel like you can't just look at those things in isolation, because then we've got issues like food security at the minute, which is then an environmental problem, which then is also a social problem, which is an economic problem global. So that's why it's hard to know where to actually start and where to put your efforts, which is why I like sustainability, because it does have that holistic view, looking at everything and trying to do what it can.
Right. So let's just take off from where you said you're in Laos. You've just finished off this 1 month trial or this volunteer.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, then I came back to Australia because at the time our sister gave birth to her first daughter, which was a pretty big life event in our family. So I wanted to be here for that. And given that I didn't have a job and I didn't really know what I was going to do next, I was quite up in the air, as it were.
So it's quite convenient to come back home.
It was, yeah, it was, and we're very lucky that, parents will accept us at any point in time in our lives. We just come back here and nest for a bit. And so I was like, well, what do I do now? I don't want to do accounting, definitely not really sure how I can make the sustainable travel thing work, want to be in Brisbane, looked around, for ecotourism and that sort of stuff. Ended up landing a job with Apple, working in the retail store, which I thought, oh, that'll be fun. I'll just do that for a little while.
I'm curious, what made you, is kind of what made you want to apply for a job at Apple on the retail floor? That's a very, very, unrelated kind of job position.
I just needed a career break, and you go past an Apple store, it kind of looks like it's fun. It'd be fun to work there maybe. I needed something that was brainless, that didn't involve spreadsheets and was more like interacting with people, not interacting with a computer. And I think my affinity for Apple products probably came from you, because like you've been a long time Apple fan, so I grew up with knowing about Apple products and that sort of thing, well, to an extent.
And I would like to blame an old friend of mine from university. I remember I think I was in second year university looking to buy a computer.
Yeah.
And my friend, a good friend of mine, he said to get a Mac. This was at a time actually in 1997 when Apple was at their lowest time in terms of the stock market, and everyone thought they were going to die.
Yeah.
And he got me onto the Mac, and then shortly afterwards he went to PC. Which is kind of funny. But anyway, back to you. You're working at Apple.
Yeah.
Just you needed a break because you've burnt yourself out from trying to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
So then what happens there?
So I worked there in the store for about 6 months, and I went, no. I'm in my early 30s at this point. The people I was working with were teenagers, late teens or like early 20s, who actually thought I was their age. So that was hilarious, but it was also very exhausting being in that environment when you're older and everyone else is younger, and they had a completely different language. They were using things like SOZ and LOL and these things, and I'm like, what? And amazeballs, and I'm like, what? I don't know what you're actually saying. Can you speak English to me, please? So at that point, I'm like, okay, I don't think this is the place for me long term. Like, I knew it wasn't, but already after 6 months, I'm like, okay, I got to get out. I got to find something else. I just started madly applying for jobs. And funnily enough, the day I quit my job at Apple Retail, I applied for a job at the head office in Sydney, like head office for Australia in Sydney, supporting an education team, just doing office admin, and they needed someone who knew something about accounting. Not that they needed an accountant, but I'm like, hey, I can do that job. They just need someone who's organized. So I applied for the job, and 2 weeks later I got it. And then another 2 weeks later I just took a plane and landed it, like I finished the retail job on a Friday, took a plane on the Saturday and started working in Sydney on the Monday for the Apple office in Sydney. It was amazing, like just, bizarre.
Super efficient.
Yes, it was amazing. I just changed cities and jobs like that.
Over a weekend.
Yeah, over a weekend. Same company. So it was, and it was like, and when I came into the office the first day, it was so quiet. I'm like, it was so good. I didn't have customers. I didn't have these teenage. I love my old colleagues in retail. I'm still friends with them, so nothing against them. It was just that environment was just so noisy, and there was just so much going on that I was, the introvert in me was getting overwhelmed. Like, this is too much stimulation. I wanted stimulation, but this is too much. So I retreated back into the corporate space behind a computer going, this is nice. This is so nice. I don't have to tell somebody when I'm going to the toilet. I don't have to tell somebody when I'm going for lunch. I don't have timed breaks. I can just, I was waiting for someone to tell me, you can go for lunch now. But no, I could just actually get up and walk to the bathroom myself without having to tell anybody. And it was like a library. It was amazing. I totally cherished it for a while, and it was great. Also great environment being around adults and having adult conversation, people who didn't say SOZ and lol. And, that was fun. But it was good being around adults. Nothing against, my fellow colleagues. Absolutely nothing against, because it was fun. And there is actually diversity in that workplace where I wasn't the only mature aged worker there, but the majority were
younger,
much younger than me.
All right, great. So you're in Sydney. You're doing the support admin job in Apple.
Yes.
Now I know that while you were there, you did co-found some environmental group.
Yes.
Was that related? Go ahead. Tell us about that.
That was amazing, actually, because I'd been chipping away at this, I definitely, I started volunteering for a beach cleanup group in Sydney, cleaning up Sydney's beaches, which was amazing. That totally opened my eyes to more knowledge and information about what I can do as an individual and learning more about the space, which I was quickly finding this is really where I wanted to be after exploring, trying different things, just seeing whether, maybe I'll just do a job and it's just a means to an end. I don't have to be passionate about it, right? So I was trialing all these things. And then on the sidelines, I was doing all this volunteering around the environmental space, realizing, that's really where my passion is. So I looked for ways to combine the two in the workplace. So everyone at work kind of knew that was my passion area. So it was, I don't know how I was just really lucky that because I'd been so vocal about what I was interested in, I connected with others who were also really interested in it. And I was fortunate to be working with the environmental affairs person or representative in our Sydney office, who did put me, forward in front of the execs for a plan about how we can build sustainability into the office environment. And that was a little bit premature, and I didn't present it, I didn't communicate, I didn't market it in the right way for my audience. So that was a big learn for me, that it didn't actually go ahead at that point in time. So 2 years later, I had another colleague come to me and say, hey, I think we should give this another go. I think this is the right time for it now.
When was this?
This was 2017.
Wow,
or
just
maybe
recent,
it was 2000.
not that recent.
It was 2016. Maybe we started talking about 2017. We've been talking about this, me and this colleague and I had been exchanging notes on this stuff and sharing information, because he was equally passionate about this stuff. And we should be able to do more. And he was working in marketing, so for me, he had the know-how of how to communicate this message better than I did. Even though I had done a marketing degree, I hadn't really formally worked in the space, and I was working in a sales team, which a lot of the work I was doing was marketing. I just didn't know how to communicate it internally to the right stakeholders, but he did. So he got it off the ground. He got the approval for it, and I was shocked. I was he's like, we've got executive approval to do this. I'm like, what? Okay. So we did it. It was amazing. We launched it, and both of us worked quite hard on trying to, because it wasn't our full-time job. We just did it on the side as a passion project within our organization, and we launched a community group which held regular events and sharing knowledge, and we put in a plan for what we were going to do for the next year. So for me, it was it was amazing to have launched that with my colleague. And then after that, I actually left. So I launched it and I went, thanks, guys. That was a great experience. Bye. I'm going to work for a charity. And everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. You're going to work for a charity. That's so you. And I'm like, okay. I would have liked to, like, if I, had I had the opportunity, I would have loved to have done that job, that community thing at Apple full time, which a lot of people who created those community groups would have loved to do that thing full time, but you still had your own full time job.
What just so we can better understand, what kinds of environmental initiatives did you spearhead within this group and for the company at that time?
Well, at the time, it was because we just launched it. It was very much building a community and spreading awareness. So the only thing I think I can say I was responsible partially for is when we moved office, everybody when they welcome pack to the new office, they all got a keep cup. And I know that I think I was partially responsible for that, because one of the execs came to me afterwards and said, see, we finally did that thing. And I was like, whoa, well, that wasn't just like that. To me was an example of the things that we could do, not the thing to do. Like, it was just an example, and he thought it was the thing that I wanted him to do, and he did it. So I'm like, wow, okay.
What is the keep cup? Just so, because I haven't heard of it. What is that?
Well, luckily I have an example here. So it's a reusable coffee cup.
Okay.
This is actually it's a brand, a Keep Cup. So a reusable cup.
Oh, so Keep is a brand.
Keep Cup is a brand. It's made in Melbourne, Australia.
Okay, it's an Australian company. That's
it's an Australian
awesome.
company. Yeah, there's lots of companies that do them now, but they're just reusable cups. So we actually got given a glass one, which is it was beautiful. It was nice. And the weird irony was that I was advocating for us not to give it out for free, because if you give something for free, people don't value it.
Yes.
And I was advocating for behavior change, not just a simple quick win like that. Yeah. So that's where I realized that I had an error in the way I was communicating my message, because it turned out to be communicated completely like, oh, okay, that's what you took away from that presentation that I gave you. Okay, that's great, but not quite what I meant. So anyway, but then I became known as, the kind of like the coffee cup person, because if anyone saw me, not that everyone knew that I was involved with that, but just because they knew my environmental stand from it. Whenever I was in the office and somebody had like a takeaway coffee cup, they're like, oh, sorry. They just had so much guilt when they saw me and they had a takeaway coffee cup. So
the idea is that you have one of these cups, and then when you go and to a takeaway place, you bring that.
Yes.
And instead of them using their
single
disposable,
use,
right?
Yes, that's right. So it was about minimizing single-use plastic, because in Australia, the production things are changing. We could talk endlessly about reusable and the manufacturing of coffee cups, but for the most part, they may appear to be paper on the outside, but on the inside they have a plastic lining which stops the hot liquids from pouring out. So because it's layered like that, it's not easy for recycling companies to separate the two. For it to be recyclable. So yes, while the paper might be recyclable, the plastic on the inside isn't. So they always end up in landfill. So using a reusable cup is a better alternative to avoid waste going to landfill, which is one of the things within sustainability that you're trying to do, is minimize, go to zero waste is kind of the dream. So that
I see.
The least
zero.
that we have going to landfill, the better.
Now, one thing that's interesting to me is because, Apple obviously promotes themselves as a very environmental company. Whenever they release a new product, they always have all their things at how they're environmental and the EPA and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit surprising that something like this in a environmental kind of sustainable group was kind of, it seems like it was kind of a hard push or a hard sell to make it happen.
No, because it's not discordant to what the company believes in, because what the company does from a manufacturing point of view in their environmental practices, I still think it's almost world class, or they're a leader in what they do in that respect, in terms of minimizing environmental damage. What they don't do is, they're not going to preach to their staff saying you have to do it or you have to do these things, right? This is what the company's doing because they believe it's the right thing to do. Doesn't mean that they enforce staff to follow suit.
Sure.
So that's yeah. So that's
Oh,
the
that's their
delineation.
positioning on the thing.
Yeah, so they're not going to force people to use reusable cups. If people want to use it, they use it because they want to, which is I think that's the right way to do it. You don't want to. You can create a culture for it, but you shouldn't make it mandatory or enforce or So that's why there was a little bit of a resistance, is that we don't want to come across as too preachy.
I see. Okay,
Which
so
I think is respectful.
Yeah, sure. So they actually had like guidelines or recommendations or suggestions to be more environmental.
Not necessarily, but they would there would be bigger awareness about the bigger issues. Like Earth Day was always celebrated, so they weren't going into these are the things you should do as an individual. Okay. Whereas our approach to the awareness or community group was to bring it back to the individual, so they could draw that straight line between what are the amazing things that we're doing as a company and how can that translate to something you could do at home. So that's what the awareness group started doing, because officially they couldn't really do that, especially from an HR perspective. It's like telling somebody you should be Muslim or you should, because it's a belief. Right. It's, in a way, it is a belief system.
So it is. So right. So that's why. So it's actually the best way for something like that to be circulated within a company is from a interest and a passion from within the employees, rather from top down. It should be from within the pool.
I mean, it can happen both ways, but creating that culture has to come from the employees themselves. In some ways, I mean, in organizational culture, that's another big topic, and how you change that, and whether it should be bottom up or top down. I mean, it can work both ways, but in this instance, the corporate approach was they didn't want to mandate things from top down. Not to say that was the wrong approach or or whatever. It was that's just the way the company rolls, and in that the only things they're really hard about is like ethical business, so or code of conduct type stuff, which I think there are financial legal ramifications, and it's protecting us as employees. It's protecting our supplies, all that sort of stuff. Whereas the other stuff is kind of like, well, where do you draw the line? And that's where it becomes, when you come back to sustainability, it is very hard to say where do you draw the line, at how far do you go. Who's responsible for these things, and what? Yeah, so that's a big conversation.
Okay, so let's just go back to where you just left. Let's go back to where you left off. You left Apple after starting off this initiative, and now you're working with Edge.
I'm working with Edge Environment now, right. But in between, I was working for that not-for-profit.
Right.
So that was it. I moved out of. I said, great, it was wonderful to set up this thing. I would love to stay and keep doing it. And, my co-founders were disappointed I didn't. But I'm like, this isn't my full-time job, and I want to do this full-time, so I need to go search for it.
Yeah. So that's actually good that you've had this, you've been touching base with that whole space. So you've seen the progression, you see where it's at, and can see probably where the gaps are and how to kind of fill them up, maybe in the future down the track or something like that.
Yeah.
In this space. So what's happening with the current work that you're doing? What is your role with Edge Environment?
So currently my role is 50% marketing and 50% project work. So that's why, like I was saying earlier, it's ironic that now I'm working in marketing and have a new appreciation for how powerful and how useful it is, and it can be used for, quote unquote good, and spreading the messages that you do want to send, rather than trying to sell things that people need or unnecessarily. Exactly. I mean, Patagonia is one of those great companies, and one of their marketing campaigns, I think it was 2013, was saying, do not buy our products, because they were anti-consumerism, because we have too much stuff. What did they do? That their sales went through the roof. So
when they said don't buy our stuff.
Yes, it was this massive tabloid in the newspaper. That it was a big campaign they did, because they were trying to say, look, we got too much stuff going to landfill. The last thing that we as human society need is more things. Yes, we sell clothing and outdoor gear and all those things, but don't buy our products.
Why did they put that out there? Well,
environmental, because they
did it truly from an environmental perspective. They didn't think it was this going to be this is going to be reverse psychology.
No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone could have predicted the sales that they achieved out of that. So it's interesting. It's a really interesting case study when you look at that. Everyone's like, it was, baffled by how that actually worked. Not that I don't think anyone's really tried to do that since. I mean, you look at Coke, it's not like they're going, don't drink our products because it's full of sugar and it's really bad for you. And anyway, we don't go into Coke because that's another big rabbit warren of their issues. But, so it's not like you've seen other big brands that have followed suit. So I don't think it was intended to drive sales. It really wasn't. Interesting.
So what sort of projects are you involved with? Because you're now in the B2B space.
Correct.
As compared to previously, you're doing a lot of stuff that was...
There's more B2C, or C2C, really. Yeah. And I was doing a lot of volunteering type stuff. So now, our clients are corporates, they're council, they're state bodies, they're big infrastructure assets that our company works on. And my job on the project side, because I'm just learning the ropes, I've only been in the role a couple of months, less than a couple of months, is to support all these different areas or service lines that we have with the skills that I have built up over 20 years of working in different corporations and not-for-profits, that sort of thing. So in a way, I'm learning the ropes, but also just filling in some resource gaps that they have on the different projects, which is getting me more exposure to what they actually do and learning more about that and where I can be in the future with the organization, where's the best fit for me. So right now it's more of an exploratory phase for me and also for them to understand what my skill sets are. From the marketing side of things, I'm helping build their brand and do that B2B marketing with them. Currently the big project is with lots of organizations. They're trying to build their website to be better, and so that's the main hub for driving.
Websites. What do you mean? How is that being environmental? How do you do a website environmentally friendly?
Oh, well, no, I'm saying that's from a marketing point of view.
Okay, sure.
But you can actually, carbon offset the power and everything behind hosting a web server. So there are actually B Corps that provide web services or website services, which means they're committed to making sure they're doing the right thing as a company themselves, and they may do things like donate to a charity, but they also do carbon offsetting of the server or the energy required to host a website, because as we know from COVID and all that sort of stuff, the amount of data, the amount of cloud services that are engaged, and the power and energy consumption behind that and the resources required to build all those servers and all those sort of things and cooling them, it's massive. So that's not something to just go, oh, that's just not that much. It does amount to a lot.
All right. So with regards to the kind of work you're doing, what kind of it's a consulting firm that helps companies be more environmental, or sustainable? So what kinds of things do you guys look at and how to optimize?
Some examples. So basically, they are becoming the one-stop shop for any organization, council, government body or non-government body for wherever they are on their sustainability journey. So depending on what they actually want to do, they basically have the service to provide it. So examples are they started off being life cycle assessment specialists, which means if you, say, work in the construction industry and you want to know whether you're better off using concrete or recycled concrete or asphalt or recycled asphalt, they can do the calculations to work out what is the total environmental cost of using a said product. So it's like from cradle to grave. So it's not just how much goes into making it, but also what happens when you're finished with the product how the disposal and the rest of it. So that's what a life cycle assessment calculation is, and that's what they've done. They started off doing is very much science-based work, including things like helping to reduce carbon or embodied carbon is the big thing now in buildings, for big construction projects or for even just property companies, about how they might want to reduce the embodied carbon in the buildings that exist already, and helping them figure out what those strategies are, whether it's buying carbon offsets or whether there are alternative materials they can source, or all these things, or things like helping them basically figure out what their strategy is or calculate their carbon footprint to start with, because that's usually the starting point for any of these companies, is just trying to figure out how much are your emissions right now, and what is a reasonable target to achieve in what time frame, and then helping them fill in the blanks as well. So the other parts that are other parts of the business, other than carbon reduction and climate resilience and infrastructure and the building side of things, well, they do also help with like things like ISCA ratings, which is a Australia rating for buildings specifically, is sustainable and ethical procurement. So that's looking at hot topics right now is like modern slavery and that's really big globally as well as Australia, because we just passed legislation on this in 2018. So it's helping organizations understand what are the risks in their supply chain and in their organization for modern slavery. And this is where I was saying before, it's like, where do you draw the line? Who's responsible for how much? And then helping them put in place strategies, plans to address those risks and to minimize them. So that's one side of it, and just being able to, So that's one example. The other things I like, we have a sustainable leadership and communications team, so it's helping leadership be, even better at doing sustainability, as it were, in the corporate sense. And also, how do you communicate that? The reporting side of things. So sustainability reporting is very big right now, because there's like quite a few different methods or approaches. And it's quite confusing if you haven't done it, or even if you have done it, what approach do you take and how do you implement it in your organization? So, yeah.
So what kinds of things would be included in a sustainability report? I assume that carbon offset, how carbon emissions, supply chain, making sure it's all clean, and what?
So it depends on, because there's so many different approaches, and it's really confusing because there's no consistency. So there's lots going on in the world right now about the harmonization of reporting, which is where I'm coming at it also from an accounting perspective, because a lot of the times annual reports are also with the financial report. And so I'm currently doing working with the chartered accountants in Australia and New Zealand, trying to figure out what is, like, not just supporting them as a member. How do we integrate or make sustainability reporting easier for corporations? So that's just, and also promoting the fact that companies should be doing the sustainability reporting, because right now there is a massive upswing in the uptake of corporations reporting on this stuff, but it's very new. Like, some of these initiatives have only been around for 3 or 4 years.
What other things that you think should be included in the reporting?
What should be included in the reporting? Well, I think one of the approaches, which I think would be the gold standard, is called an integrated report. So it encompasses everything, which is the things that you were mentioning. What is their carbon emissions? What is their plan to reduce the carbon emissions? How are they tracking from a modern slavery front, as well as, what are their overall company strategy or plans, and how much is sustainability embedded into how they operate? So it's not meant to be a siloed thing. It should be embedded throughout how the organization operates from the ground zero all the way to exec. And that's where sometimes this is definitely where you need exec buy-in to be able to thread it through the whole organization in terms of operations, everything. So that, and reporting on that, saying what you are doing in that front should be included as well. So I'm not the expert on reporting, so I'll just flag that. I'm still learning so much about this space. There are so many certifications. People are doing, like, going climate neutral or carbon neutral. So there's lots of different targets, but one of the other parts of it, one of the other popular approaches to make sure you include are science-based targets, so ones that are in line with the Paris Agreement back in 2016. So that's still the things that came out of that, like the Sustainable Development Goals, science-based targets, all these initiatives that have come out of that landmark agreement are now, we've only now got a couple of years of where people have actually been able to make it happen. So everything's still very new, which is why it's hard to say what should everything be included. And then there's another initiative called the Task Force for Task Force for Climate Disclosures, climate-related disclosures, and they include scenarios, so that if say worst case scenario by 2050 we still continue the way we are, what does your business look like in that scenario? And that's usually quite shocking because some of these businesses, they won't exist at all. So including those sort of scenarios in and what their plan is to mitigate that would be included in a sustainability report.
Just one particular thing, which probably is something that everybody can look at, and obviously we're in a consumer society. A lot of things are produced products. We've got products everywhere. Supply chain management and ensuring the supply chain is clean. I mean, I'm curious as to what kinds of things you can do to make sure that whatever you're buying, or as a company or as an individual, is sourced and procured in a proper way.
Well, okay, from the individual point of view, there's a lot you can do in terms of just researching your company before you buy. Sometimes there's a lot of companies now that have done things like certification, so it makes it easier for you. Looking for, like, there's websites that now have lists of the companies that are ethical or are sustainable or responsible. So responsible and ethical are the two terminologies that you search for if you're trying to find. I'm looking for responsible underwear, for instance. Yeah,
so there's no kind of like seal, how you or certification. It's just kind of just these random people that are very interested in this that are saying that this is responsible. This is
there are multiple certifications, so there's no globe. So if you look at every industry, say in Australia for building products, there's something called GECA, Good Environmental Choice Australia. So they sort of certify certain products. But within, like, construction's a big industry, which is why I keep referring to it as well. There's so much going on in that space. You've got Green Star, for buildings in America. They've got the LEED certification. In the UK, it's BREEAM. So, and then
so it's very fragmented.
Yeah. So I think there would be very few, and if I look at travel, there's a company here that started in Brisbane called EarthCheck, and they certify travel service providers as being like environmentally sound practices, and they have tiers. So you have gold, silver, and platinum, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of certification and labels, eco labels, which
one of the things I'm concerned about with relation to all these certifications and labels is that we've seen it happen in the food industry, where they'll come up with a heart whatever, and then it seems to be you just pay people off to get these certifications.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's what kind of regulations are around all these certifications to ensure that they actually, mean what they say.
Yeah, so that is difficult. That's why as a consumer you have to do your research. So there's definitely greenwashing, and, unless you really investigate a certain label and their procedures and, and this is where I think consumers have a lot of power as well. If you definitely have purchasing power. You put your money where your values are, right? So if you do the research and then you only pay or you only spend your money on those companies that you really think are aligned with your own values, because some people they're more interested in animal cruelty free stuff. So there's a lot of certifications around that. But every country almost has their own certification thing. With coffee, you have things like Rainforest Alliance, which are more global and recognized, or fair trade.
Yep.
But there's been, I think recently, fair trade has come up in the media as going, well, is it really? Have they had the similar sort of thing of some sort of corruption in their supply chain as well? I'm not sure. I think it was fair trade that might have got called out. But yeah, this is where, as a consumer, if you find something, and we have the power with social media to say, hey, what are you doing, X company, because this isn't right. So I think social media is powerful in that way, and we do have a lot of power as a consumer to find this information out, because back in the day, we probably wouldn't have been able to find this stuff out. It's not that easy, but now it's a lot easier. And then from a corporation point of view, everyone's just starting on their journey. Some places like, you got your Unilevers of the world, which are like massive global corporations who are doing a lot of work from a modern slavery point of view, and looking in their supply chains, seeing how ethical it is and how they're procuring their raw materials. And you also people like Apple, who have done some work in looking at where is the cobalt coming from that goes into all our electronics, where all these precious materials being sourced from, And allegedly, these companies say, "Oh, we've done our check. We're definitely not employing slave labor." But there's a certain point where you've got many, many, many tiers of supplies in most bigger corporation supply chains. It's knee deep in there. It will take a long time for them to go through all their supplies to find out where the risks are. But that's where that's the work of my colleague at Edge Environment. She helps organizations assess their risks. So whatever might be high risk, let's look at that first and sort that out. Focus on the things that you can change that are going to make the highest impact first. And that's what a lot of, in terms of going back to your question about reporting, one of the gold standards is doing a materiality matrix. Have a look at what's important to your stakeholders. And when we say stakeholders, we're being very careful. We're not saying shareholders, it's stakeholders. So it's your customers, your suppliers, your employees. What's important to everyone in the value chain of the company, and look at what are the issues that are important, and let's focus on those issues as a means of where to start in terms of addressing all the sustainability things, because there's just so much that could be done.
All right. Yeah, this is a super, from our brief conversation here today, sustainability is obviously a very, very big subject. There's so much that we could dig into.
Yeah.
What is something, and it would be great to have another conversation some other stage, but what are some simple things that we as individuals can do today or in the next week that can make a difference in terms of contributing to being more sustainable as a person on this planet?
Yeah, that's a great question that I do get asked a lot, because there are so many things, as we just discussed, that you could possibly do. So for me, my advice to people is just pick one thing that you are interested in, and just tweak and slowly chip away at changing. Can you change it radically, or you can chip away at gradually changing this one area that you're interested in. So for example, if you love food, then the thing is hate waste. So food waste is a big thing. So try to minimize the amount you purchase from a week-to-week basis, so that you don't end up with food waste, or find creative ways to deal with the food before it goes off. Or if it's just on that borderline, there's recipes, there's things you can do so you avoid any food going into landfill, or you compost. So there's things like that that people can do from a food waste perspective. Like if you love coffees, then, and you're always going to take away a coffee cup, easy win is get a reusable cup. But the thing is, you have to use it, right? So that can sometimes be a barrier. So just pick the thing that you think you can do. Start with that one thing, because that's how I started. I didn't start being this sustainability, guru or example by overnight. This has been years of me slowly changing my individual behaviors. And the thing is, I was my own test case. I'm like, if I can't do it myself, then I can't ask anyone else to do it. So I wanted to definitely experience and lead by example, because 10 years ago, I was buying water in plastic bottles, which today would be like, why would you do that? So right, for the most part, people still do it. So I'm not shaming anybody from whatever practices they do. So just do the thing that makes sense to you. So or just pick the one thing that you're passionate about.
Just to help people come up with or have a lot of suggestions or ideas of what they could do. Can you just share like a list of a few different things that you're doing right now that is sustainable? So,
and also if you are trying to do that sort of materiality matrix right thing, what is the highest impact you can have? There are lots of scientific studies about these things. So one of the number one things in terms of reducing your carbon footprint is not having any children. Which is interesting. So, for me, I'm like, yay, I don't have children, so I'm helping the world, sort of thing.
Really? That is the biggest thing that people can do?
That is the number one thing.
So like use a condom, just don't have kids.
Yeah.
Asia is doing really well there,
Yeah. But not to say you shouldn't have kids, it's just that's one, you have one less child, Then the next thing is like, take less flights, which I think everyone's fortunate that, people probably don't want to take flights right now, or there's not as many flights going. So that's another thing that if you're doing, yay. Or if you are still having to take a flight, carbon offset. The third
How would you carbon offset taking a flight?
Well, when you book flights, there's always that carbon offset thing, and it's only really like $1 or a few dollars, and it can make a difference.
What does that actually do? Because, for me as a consumer, if I see that, they're just like, they just want to take more of my money. How does that actually offset the carbon by by paying that extra dollar?
So they've done a calculation, and the airline companies are partnered with a carbon offset program, which often is tree planting in a place that needs reforestation, because deforestation is a massive thing. It's taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So by planting a tree, it might take 20 years, but then it will eventually. They've done the calculation as to how much it would cost to plant enough trees now to offset the carbon.
Right.
Flights are very carbon intensive. Sometimes it's water programs. So it's not just tree planting, but tree planting is the most common project.
So that's where the money goes.
Yeah.
To contribute to for that, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And the programs these days, there was a lot of contention, like maybe 20 years ago. Was it really that effective? Was it really going to those programs? But now my understanding is that most of these programs are legit and they're doing the right thing, and they are picking the areas that really need it. So they're focusing on being the most effective, and they check where it's not just planting in the backyard going, oh, I got $1, I'm just going to plant a tree and that's my money. No, they've actually figured out where the best places are. So then the third thing is either drive less or don't own a car. So if you go carless, that's amazing. So public transport, walking, cycling, running,
maybe a bike.
Cycling, rollerblading, ice skating, whatever it is, skiing. No. So then the fourth thing is actually to eat less meat or really a plant-based diet. But eating less meat, just one meal less of meat a week, can make a massive difference.
I've heard a lot of this. That whole argument about the amount of land it takes to keep but I've also heard that that the amount of land you need to plant, the number of plants you need to create the same amount of protein or whatever is just as much or maybe more. I don't know. It's just something that I remember hearing.
There is obviously arguments on either side and science backing both sides of it, but basically the ideal situation is regenerative agriculture. That's where they actually do crop rotation. They do animal rotation, livestock rotation, as well as crop rotation on a piece of farming land. And what that does is it will naturally fertilize the ground. It will naturally till the ground, so you don't need to use pesticides. You use less water because the soil is now nutrient rich and your crops are healthier. So there's ways that you can actually, have your cake and eat it too. But regenerative agriculture is ironically the way we used to farm up until we got the industrialization with all the pesticides and, all that sort of stuff. So that is making a comeback. So small farming, small scale farming.
Yeah, what's that called? It's become very popular, edible, and there's a lot of these edible garden places that are promoting urban farming, growing stuff in your own backyard.
Yeah, all that stuff can help, because ironically things like planting basil is carbon sequestering. It will take carbon out of the atmosphere. So I live in an apartment and I have a balcony, so I'm planting as many herbs and all that sort of stuff as I can, because I can use it for starters. And herbs are so expensive in the supermarket, and theoretically it should be taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's kind of like, double happiness. So
is there a website or a place where people can go to kind of get ideas on ways they can modify how they live to be more sustainable?
There are so many out there. There is a lot of information. People just start looking at their interest area. I mean, I've written articles on it on LinkedIn. I have my own website where I'm, and my social media.
What's your website?
Instagram, travelbunnyblog.com.
So you can check that website out, but so I guess you just do a Google search on being sustainable living or something like that and get a bunch of stuff.
There is so much, and because you want to find the information that's in your area as well, because the things that you can do in Australia or even in my local council area, because they do certain recycling practices, all that sort of stuff, is different. Because I spent like 6 months traveling the world just last year before COVID hit.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky me. And I went around having a look at what the sustainable practices are. Not just the things that are from a living perspective, but from a travel perspective too. What are the practices that are in place, and what can you do? And each country was different. Like some countries were amazing, and even within the US, I know it's very topical right now. States like Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, with where Oregon is, all that sort of stuff, they had amazing, like in a restaurant, they would have a bucket for organics, for composting, which you can get in some places here in Australia, but not everywhere. So that's why I pick find your local information, because there'll be somebody who's absolutely passionate like me in the area that's trying to put that information out there. So I recommend either getting involved with local groups or finding the information that's local to you about what you can do.
Are there any like big global trusted resource websites? I hear what you're saying. So definitely check local stuff, but what about just ones that are fairly trusted in this space right now?
I think there are, but again, it's not going to be one, silver bullet of website.
But I'm just saying, like,
sustainableliving.com. Maybe that exists. I don't know. Sorry.
Get it.
Whoever that is, you're welcome for the traffic sites. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are more global, but it's definitely very industry specific.
Yeah, no problems. I mean, if you do come up with anything, we'll add it to the podcast notes. Yeah. Let's. I think we're running out of time, so let's tie this up now, because I know that I thought it would be good just to tie it up with what you've been doing. You've kind of, as you said, come full circle, and now that you have. You told me that you've been invited to speak with Accounting Australia or whatever about this subject, about sustainability. Yeah. And I'm curious as to like what sorts of things were you speaking? What did they ask you to speak about, and what kinds of things did you share with them?
So a lot of the work I've been doing in the last year has actually been trying to encourage accountants not to leave the profession, but there are things that they can do as an accountant, which I didn't know about when I was, as an accountant, that can help from the sustainability perspective. Accountants, Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, I think so, a previous governor, he actually said accountants can change the world. And I believe that, because I feel like every individual can change the world, but definitely accountants, because there's an accountant in every single organization. People come to them for advice and to give them information to help with their better decision making mostly. So if they put the right information in front of people, they can influence decisions. So some of my work was helping with young chartered accountants and showing them and speaking about what it is that they can do and how they can be influential in this sense. The other part of it was I was talking about sustainable business models, so more mid-career, pitched at mid-career accountants about they're probably getting a lot of their internal stakeholders or external stakeholders coming to them asking them what can they do about the sustainability thing, because if they've heard about it but they don't know what to do, or if they're in an organization, how can they transition to a sustainable business model? So it's incorporating all the things that we've been talking about, but there are different models that are out there. But we're talking in that specific webinar, we spoke about the Future Fit model, which is incorporating a lot of the things that we were talking about today.
So basically you're kind of looking at using the accountants as a network or a mouthpiece to help put this message more in front of people within the kind of business space.
Sure, but it's even better than that. I feel like they are in the perfect position to be able to influence change and better decision making.
What would be one example of something that you've suggested that they could take on to have that effect?
Well, the first thing is that they actually have to start having that conversation. They have to, first of all, if they don't know anything about it, to start learning a bit more or engage people, engage experts to help them with that. But the first step with any of this stuff is just open the door to communicating, because the thing about sustainability is we can't do it alone. It's definitely a group effort. So I'm not expected to be the expert in anything in my organization. Even though I'm working for consultancy, people turn to us for expertise. We can't know everything, so it's about finding the solution together, which ironically is something I learned at Apple as well. It's like you come into an Apple store, right? You expect the person there to know everything about every single product in there. It's like, no, and they teach you that. You can't know everything. So the catchphrase was always, let's find out together. So I feel like it's funny how the way things come around and thread through your life, there's definitely some sort of consistency that comes through. But with sustainability, it's totally about let's find the solution together, but let's at least start, put the conversation out there, put it on the meeting agenda. And you'd be surprised, I think most times, and I'm surprised at how many people are coming out of the woodwork because they see that I'm interested in sustainability. I've had so many accountants now connect with me on LinkedIn going, oh, it's so nice to meet someone else who's passionate about sustainability too. What can we do about it? It's like, well, okay, let's figure this out together. Yeah.
All right. I think that's a great way that we can finish off this podcast. And certainly you have definitely opened up the conversation about sustainability, definitely opened up my mind in terms of what it incorporates and how deep and how many levels there are involved with all of this. So definitely great stuff there. So where can people find you? They can find you at your blog,
travelbunnyblog.com.
Instagram?
They can find linked, and it's the same. It's at travelbunnyblog is on Instagram. Same thing on Twitter, on Facebook, LinkedIn as well. So yeah, on my website and my Instagram, you'll probably see if you're watching. If not, I'm holding up a little hemp scrubby thing, which is made by my friend and completely zero waste and sustainably made and ethically made. So that's an example of where I'm trying to live.
What do you use this for?
This is for either exfoliation, so you can use it on your body, or you can use it to, I wouldn't recommend doing both with the same one, but you can wash your dishes. And so
okay, so it's like a reusable.
Yes.
So this is
sponge.
like better
It's
than
like
us, because I know we use here at home. We use these yellow green
which
things.
is plastic and nylon and.
How long does this last as a washer?
So our cousin Lucinda bought one off me in March, and it only started falling apart in end of November. So it lasted her about 9-10 months.
Oh, that's pretty decent.
And that's for the 5-person household. I had one with a 2-person household for maybe 15 months.
Wow, that's great. So you use this to wash dishes.
Yep.
That's 15.
Yep.
That's awesome.
And it's antibacterial, it's antifungal, so we won't get any mold growing on it. Yep.
So even if it's wet, you leave it there dry on the thing, it won't, no mold.
No, because hemp is naturally antifungal, and it's fire resistant, like heat resistant as well. Like I dropped it in a steam, not on purpose, but I dropped it in a steaming hot pan that was burnt, and after it cooled down, I fished it out. Nothing. It would look like nothing had happened to it at all.
Well, this is really cool. How much is something like this?
$17.95. It's handmade as well.
Okay.
So, and when you're done with it, you just put it in the compost. So and if you don't have a compost, dig a hole in your backyard if you have one and just bury it there.
Okay, that's great. What do you call this?
It's a hemp dishcloth.
Hemp dishcloth. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So
Thanks
these
for
are the
that.
sort of things you can find on my website. So I try to give suggestions and examples of what you can do in your own personal life. If you feel like you can't do anything more than in your own personal circle, just start with yourself.
All right, fantastic. All right, thank you very much, Miranda. It's been a pleasure having you on this podcast, and I certainly look forward to our next conversation, probably more on sustainability, maybe on some other topics, but definitely thank you again for joining me here today.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks again for joining me on this very first lit escapade with my sister Miranda. Hope you got a ton of value and inspiration from it, and at least one new idea or thing you can do and incorporate into making your life better and more sustainable. All the nitty-gritty details we discussed can be found in the show notes, which includes references and links to nearly everything we discussed, including a full transcript of the podcast. Check it all out at livinglit.life. Love to hear your comments, feedback, suggestions. Hit me up on the old school email, hello@livinglit.life. Until then, watch out for episode 2 when we go introspective with an old medical colleague, Dr. Chris Kerr, and cover some very interesting ground, including how he pivoted from a musical dance career to becoming a medical pathologist. We talk about his pet passion, the process communication model, what's it all about, and how it can help our communication with ourselves and the world. We also touch upon discipline, motivation, procrastination, and the importance of setting boundaries and how to do it. Plus, how he's managed to live out his childhood dream in his 40s. That's all coming up in the next episode. And in case you missed it, that was a little reference to a Dr. Dre. Drop the Ray and you got me, Dr. D, the next best thing. Thanks again for tuning into this first episode. Until next time, stay lit. This has been a livinglit.life production, copyright 2021, all rights reserved. To join me as a guest on the show or for sponsorship and partnership inquiries, please email hello@livinglit.life. And don't forget, stay lit. See ya.